Hello, Sarah. How you doing, pal?
I'm fine. I'm just running about a bit ragged at the moment, but fine. How are you? How's Inverness?
Inverness is fantastic. What a beautiful place it is, honestly.
It really
If anyone hasn't
is.
visited Inverness, Sarah, they should really get that on their bucket list because it's such an amazingly beautiful place.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've actually been casting my eye up that way and thinking, oh, is there a way I can get myself moved up there as well?
I know. It's well, my heart's in the Highlands because this is where I'm from,
Yeah,
and so it's good to be back. Good to be back home. And the thing is, I'm meeting a lot of people that I met that I haven't met for a long time, which is very nice as well.
that's lovely.
Um,
Yeah,
now,
that's
Sa-
lovely.
yeah, it's nice. Sarah, we're on today because 10 years have passed. Can you believe it? I can't. 2014. Can you tell us, first of all, what was it? What did you feel like September way back then? Can you remember your feelings about where we were going to go with this and how were you positive or?
Oh, look, absolutely. As time went on, I should explain that I wasn't back in Scotland permanently. I was living in the States for 10 years, and then I was going back and forward and staying with my son down south. So I kind of started coming back. It took 2 years before I moved back to Scotland permanently in 2014, and I could go up. I was going up visiting my mum, watching what was happening and so on, and I wasn't allowed to vote because my domicile was the States, but I could go on marches and do and go to kind of meetings and stuff, and I couldn't believe the atmosphere. It was, and as time passed, and you could just that feeling of change, and I think maybe because I had come home after being abroad for so long, that the kind of that mood, what was happening across Scotland was really obvious to me. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And as we got closer, I began to absolutely believe that we were going to do this. In fact, by the night of the referendum, of course, like everybody else, I stayed up, watching. I just knew because of what I'd seen. I'd driven across Scotland, talked to people. It was clear to me this was a yes. I didn't care what the polls said. It was obvious.
Yeah.
And then that result came through, and I can't. I think like everybody else, it was like a death. It was really like a death. It was absolutely devastating at the time.
I remember, Sarah, Jim Siller says, we have the power in our hands to change the course of history.
Yeah.
And we didn't.
No, we didn't.
Or did we? I wouldn't put it past this Westminster machine to take out all the guns blazing and try and change us around somewhere or other. Because I remember, and there's no point in going over spilt milk and all the rest of it, but I remember there was no barcodes on the ballot. It was just.
Were you another one that didn't have barcodes? Well, here's the thing. Before the referendum, because I was, as I said, I was coming up and down. I wasn't living back in Scotland at that point, and I was staying down south with my son and daughter-in-law when I was here, and then I was in the States. So I looked at this and I thought to myself, and partly because I think I had seen what was done to my husband's people, to Native American people. So I had this, and they're just going to let us do this thing. So I started thinking about what would they do if they were going to, because if they, you can see what's happening in Scotland. It was so exciting. I thought if they were going to cheat this, if they're going to stop this, what would they do? So my husband and I, late husband and I, took a look at what he called the chain of custody and control of the ballot. He said that's where it would happen. So we looked at, it's, there's the printing, spot checks, barcodes, distribution, and electoral roll. There's the point where the votes are transferred between the polling stations and the counting stations. And then there's the electoral roll. And in every one of those at every one of those stages, there is a weakness. There is something that could be exploited.
Yeah.
And so in really, in a really robust, good, genuinely democratic country, you'd test all that. You'd get companies pay hackers to go into to try to break into their systems, their computer systems, to find what's the weakness. So we looked at that and we went, well, right, here's the weakness. So what we found, the minute that result was announced, I got together with some others and we formed a group, because I had said in advance, if they cheat this, it will be like this. And the first thing we'll get whistleblowers, and there'll be something wrong with the ballots.
Yep.
We did a survey that week. We got over 9,000 people before someone attacked the site. And we downloaded the names, people who said they'd go to court to say their ballots had no barcodes on the back. And we also had whistleblowers with bags of these, who called up and said, if you go around, you find a bag by the bins. This guy does, and I've got it on video. And there's the bag, and he takes them out. They're all ballots that are blank on the back. And we also had eyewitnesses who followed the ballots being transported and saw them being tipped out. So we had all of that, but the SNP wouldn't look at it because it made them look like sore losers. Still refused to believe it. I'm an award-winning journalist. I didn't look at the grainy images on the TV and go, oh look, the piles are here. I went, if this happened, where did it happen? How did it happen? Where's the absolute evidence?
Exactly.
One ballot blank on the back was evidence. Hundreds was enough to say judicial review.
Yep.
Yeah. Then we found out, because it was an opinion poll, even though they made this is self-determination, this is Scotland's exercise in, history in our hands, blah blah. Actually, it was an opinion poll, and in an opinion poll where there's no contract. So when you go to the polls in an election, there's a contract between the voter, the electorate, and the elected government and the elected representatives. If there's fraud, if there's cheating, that is fraud because there's a contract there. If it's just an opinion poll,
there's no contract. Yeah.
There's no contract, and there can't be fraud. And we pushed really hard. We discovered, finally, it was a policewoman who told me, after hours and hours over a couple of weeks on the phone and collecting evidence, who said, but it's an opinion poll, and it would have to be the electoral management board. I think, is it the management board in Scotland, the commission in England? Anyway,
I can't remember.
It would have to be the electoral management board who requested the police to investigate, or the SNP the Scottish, government could request it, and neither of them would do so. Tinfoil hats and all that.
Well, one thing I noticed in Inverness, once the vote came through, it suddenly changed from a yes campaign to an SNP campaign. And I saw people lining up to saying this is a great chance to take the fight to Westminster. And it all changed after that. And the SNP didn't, as you say, they didn't question this. They didn't query it. They didn't support the Scottish people in their for justice in this. They went and took their seats. And people made a fortune out of going down south. And we're now 10 years past. That still sticks in my craw, Sarah. And I've given SNP my vote continually because I've nowhere else to put it, to be honest. And I think I'm like most people. But now that we're coming to where we are now, I can't trust the SNP. I don't trust them in Westminster. I don't trust Westminster. So where are we? And how do we find and how do we get to independence from now on?
Well, what is disappointing is that, but not surprising given the media and the political establishment, what is disappointing is that so many Scots don't understand what happened, or didn't look at the referendum and go, let's take a look at this. Would that have delivered independence? If we'd got the majority, which we were never going to be allowed to get for various reasons, if it had obeyed the rules. There's a really interesting I think Stuart, is it Kirkwood, who's done this we didn't survey, and talks about the effect of the vow 3 days before, the one they say they delivered, although there's all kinds of things in there that you can
Purdah for one, they weren't allowed
now
to.
that was the Edinburgh Agreement had a 4-week Purdah period. You weren't to introduce any more new promises and blah blah within that period. And along came the vow, and then they said, oh, it didn't make any difference. Of course it made a difference.
Of course it did.
So we had a combination of things. We had a franchise that allowed people who owned second homes, people who were visiting, people who were temporary, students, workers, what have you, voting on the future of, supposedly voting on the constitutional future of a nation. We had the Purdah thing being broken. We had a media that was 70-30 for no, which would not be allowed in a constitutional referendum of any validity. And then we had postal vote returns where electoral redundancy, which means that people die, they move, there are mistakes. So it's somewhere between 13 and 17%, which means that if you get 100% voter turnout or voter return, your 100% is actually at most 87. And we got areas where there was an over 90% return. Again, not looked at. Blank back ballots, videoed, filmed, handed into the police, not looked at. So, you've got all that going on to tell you something very, very clear. The British state, which is in effect the English state with Scotland annexed, the British state had no intention of allowing Scotland to have a real exercise in self-determination. But what they did do was they told the international community that Scotland had this referendum, this vote. They had exercised their right to self-determination and had decided to remain within the Union. That was why Cameron allowed it. And it's always to do with what's happening internationally, what the pressure is. The problem is that we haven't learned from that.
Yes.
We have not learned. There was a thing out by, I watched the other night about Nicola, the Tartan Messiah thing by Shawnee. And, in lots of ways it's quite funny, but on the other hand, it's just, you go, honest to God, guys, you honestly believe that if enough people in Scotland had got behind it, this would have delivered independence? You're dreaming. England without Scotland is bankrupt.
That's right.
It's nothing but lies, Gers and all the rest of it, lie upon lie upon lie to make out that the vampire's victim, the blood supply for the vampire, is actually the beneficiary of that vampire's largesse and generosity. It's lie upon lie upon lie. The lie of the union. There was no union. We can prove that. The treaty has never come into effect.
That's right.
We've got Scotland added to the English crown and administered under an English crown, and it changes its name. We've got Scotland the poor. We've got Scotland the invaded. Scotland and we're still having people say, well, all we need to do is good government. Good government. There's not even this. Look, if we've escaped one thing by we were never going to win. That's my position now. Is it didn't matter what we'd done. We believed in it. We thought it was true. All our politicians believed in it. It wasn't true. They were not going to let us win. Now we need to grow up and recognize what we're up against. And what we're up against is a colonizing, immoral, ruthless, rogue state. The one that is not complying with international law in terms of Palestine, is not complying with international law in terms of Northern Ireland, is not complying with international law in terms of the EU Withdrawal Act. It's not it has never complied with international law in terms of Scotland. It has gone around the world grabbing, pillaging, destroying, and talking about democracy, civilization, and bringing both of these to these backward primitive people, which, by the way, includes the Scots, That's who we're up against. Right, guys. Instead of going, oh, well, we do this wonderful thing. We had this great government who could just make, do all these things and everybody would vote and we'd get independence. Oh, my God. The reality is this is who you're up against. Once you know that, you can start working out how the heck to fight.
But we're up against it, Sarah, in everything we do and everything we see. Our broadcasting, we get English football. Now, after some debate, we're getting Scotland games on, I think it's ITV4, away in the wilderness, if you're lucky enough to get it. But in everyday life, everything's British for us. Even the Celtic Rangers thing. I read today and I was so disappointed. The Celtic guy says it's almost like our lives are in ruins, but this 95 minutes of football when Celtic win gives us hope and faith. And I'm thinking, so you'll take 90 minutes of your life over your whole life to be happy. It's incredible how ingrained we are in the British system, and we don't even know it.
That's how colonization works. And we've got three fronts that we have to be conscious of and we have to work on. And it's, I just keep reminding myself, look, if the way up the mountain looks absolutely flipping impossible, at least you can see the way, and you're not being led by people saying, well, look, I tell you what, let's just go this path here and we'll go round and round the mountain. And and eventually we'll wear the mountain down. Seems to be so the way up the mountain, we've got three very big obstacles, and oddly enough, the international one is probably the least difficult. The international obstacle just lies in the fact that independence does not happen at home. Now, that's a thing, and we'll come to this because there's only a relatively small percentage of Scots who care specifically about this and the word independence. People care about how disgusting the political system is and how corrupt it is and how appalling their lives are and how miserable and scary and all the rest of it is. But the word independence doesn't fire people up in the way that it did in 2014, except for a hardcore of us. But let's look at that. In terms of independence, liberation, really, decolonization, as Alf says, it doesn't happen at home when you have a vote on anything. That's the big mistake that we made. And back then, 10 years ago, I put my hand up and say I knew nothing about constitutional foundations or international law or treaties or any of that. I knew nothing. I do now. Independence happens when you're recognized by another country. So we have a vote here. We're not independent. We all declare independence. Nothing happens until you are accepted into that international community as a sovereign state. You're nothing. You're not. You're just, nobody will trade with you. Nobody will deal with you. Corporations can't sign contracts with you. You're just not recognized, and you carry on. You can call yourself a purple spotted elephant if you like, but you're not an independent state. So that's absolutely what has to happen. But there's a block right now to Scotland getting international recognition unless it goes through the, what was it? The Tartan Messiah called it the gold standard or the Section 30 route or whatever. Yeah. So, and that block is that Scotland was represented as being a voluntary partner in the creation of the Union. And that's what's believed. And what that means is, think about a mum and a dad, they have a kid, the kid now has rights that are actually, stronger than the rights of the two parents. So the right of self-determination to peoples sits in a kind of tension against the right to the integrity of a state. And most states don't come about because of a treaty. They come about by virtue of they're just factually there. And most states haven't made claims about how it's a voluntary creation. But Britain has, or the English state has, and that means that we can go and we can demonstrate to the international community that this was a lie and that Scotland is a dependency and is administered under an English crown and plundered and, as Alf has shown, has all these colonial markers. Now that clears one obstacle. The other obstacle is, the other obstacles are here at home, and they are Westminster and our own kind of political establishment that is still in the mood of the 2014. They're coming back to that and still yes and I have no criticism of that except to say, guys, this could never have worked. And your most sort of luminous example of how a great government in Scotland could have delivered the vote ignores what you're up against. You're up against that British state, which will not allow a real and honest constitutional referendum. You can say the New Caledonia franchise, and you've not looked at the alternative route.
Well, Sarah, can I just put in? Yesterday, I was watching John Swinney, right, and it doesn't seem to me that he knows the strength on the argument against Westminster and the strength they have, because he was saying he would work constructively with the UK government on, I think it was Grangemouth. Now, is that the right tack to take? And is that a good message to put out to people, saying that you'll do this the proper way? Or should we be more robust and say we can't trust that Labour Party?
Oh, the proper way. The proper way, the legal way. You're dealing with a rogue. They're dealing with a rogue state.
But does John Swinney know that?
Of course he knows it. He knows what international law is, because we know what the ICJ has said. We know what the what the EU treaties said. We know what the British state has always done, claiming it's sovereign over international law. And he's looking at this perfidious Albion, the state, not the people, has been the same since before the Union. So you take Queen Anne's First Minister, Robert Hartley, who said that other nations, and I mean our allies, say that we are perfidious. As they say that since we violated the treaty with Scotland and laugh at fundamental and unalterable provisions, articles, it's small wonder we treat other nations as we do. That has never changed. How the heck have we got to the point where our own political establishment won't look and say, look, this is how they were in 1708, this is how they were in 1745, this is how they were in 1820, this is how they were in 1900, this is how they are today when it comes to what are called peremptory norms. That's right. What we know as the norms of law that everybody understands, but they don't exist for this state. And yet, we'll be we won't make trouble. We'll be cooperative. We'll be constructive. They're busy, and you look at what's happening to Scotland in these horrific free ports and special economic zones.
Listen, we've only just started here. We're into free ports already. My goodness, I know.
But the Scottish government, and this is something David Powell proved, did not have to agree to them.
I know.
It did not have to agree to them, but it has signed away our sovereignty. Now, all you do, it's, what's that analogy where blackmail? So you have a blackmailer and you pay up in return for, he doesn't do this, or he'll, but they just take more and more and more. And they don't seem to have learned that is the character of the state that we're dealing with. And they're not willing to stand up to them. And for some, that may be because there is a very attractive little greasy pole out there that you can get to climb and have a very,
lucrative career out of.
Yeah. a wee niche for yourself. And, for others, it may be fear. For others, it may just be lack of ability or lack of intellect. I don't know. But here's the other lesson from the referendum. For pity's sake, people, have we not learned that this, quote, system of government in which we imagine some, benign and honorable and decent government that we vote for, and that's, our votes will produce that somehow, when human nature tells us, take a look at history. The greats, the really amazing people who came along and became, leaders, the ones that things like the National Health Service, the welfare state, they were the exceptions.
I know.
They always came out of a people-driven movement, but they're the exceptions in a history of human beings for whom those who are least fit to have power crave it. They crave the attention, the power. That you want to have a look at it writ large, take a look at Donald Trump. That is what that looks like at the extreme. That is what happens. That's what draws politicians, and then they get, and then then you've got a small body of people, a small group, who are absolutely vulnerable to the greed of the corporations, and it's all kept away from the people who have no say, no way of coming back. They just get told, well, vote again for another flavor of the same, in 5 years. That, surely we have woken up and realized, if we are going to have an independence worth talking about, it can't be independence for a group of privileged cronies, who are going to
that's a really interesting point, Sarah. But it comes down to now what we're talking about is trust, because we can't trust Kate Forbes to say everything's going to be all right for people of Scotland. These free ports are going to be green. It's a different way of doing things. Rubbish. They're not. We know that. So who can we trust? What political party can we trust? Do we have to see a root and branch clear out of the dead wood and the damaging factors that are in the SNP? Create a new party? That might be difficult as well. We've seen how Alba have struggled. So who do we trust in a political party sense, and how do we change them from within?
I think the model is broken. Look at how parties work. You muscle your way up to, you get in to be a councillor. There's some very good councillors out there, though.
Yeah, I know.
But that, there's the ladder, and you muscle your way up there, and you get a bit higher, and you get onto the national executive, and you get adopted as a candidate. But you have to promise that even if your conscience tells you what the party wants to do is wrong, you'll vote for it. And now join this tiny wee group of people who come under this extraordinary pressure to start wheeling and dealing and getting this or getting that. They've already made promises to big pharma in terms of, drug provision, provision. They're talking to the Americans about, you can have a bit of the NHS and so on and so forth. And yet they're making a completely different set of promises to the electorate. Yeah. And that's the party system. That is the political party system. It's an essentially English system, by the way.
I know, that's the problem.
No, it doesn't work. It's not. It's, again, we've got to get rid of this. If maybe we should all go and see a hypnotist once a week.
I know.
Politicians are human beings. Human beings are corruptible. The system is eminently corruptible. The political system is not democratic. You're going to have to do it yourself. People want it in this. We're so spoon-fed. We want someone else to come along and do that and do it right and do it for us. And we can feel virtuous about going to the ballot box if we do. That's got to stop. We've got to change what parties are, what they do, how they do it. You've got to have a party that is willing to give power back to the people. I tear my hair out when I hear people talking about empowering local communities. And no, giving your power away doesn't mean giving communities more say. It means being answerable to the people. It means having the ability, the people having the ability to sack you, recall you, and have a new election, impeach you, have a referendum and tell you, no, you're not doing that, or have a popular initiative and say, yes, you're going to do this. Which is this idea, then you'll hear the dyed-in-the-wool career politicians say, but, first of all, they don't trust the people. They don't believe people can make good decisions. They believe they can. My God, take a look in the mirror. The second thing they don't believe is that that they still have any real role in that case. And that's, in other words, guys, you want to be the captains of the ship. We're talking about cooperatives where what we have are navigators and chart finders and coordinators, but you're not sitting there in charge and accountable, being the great Robert the Bruce, or however you see yourself, leading the charge. And, it's time for the people of Scotland to understand that we need to be a nation of leaders. Every single person who has a brilliant idea that we could implement is a leader. Every single person who's working as a carer, who's looking for people in their community, is a leader. That's leadership. And parties need to be parties that are going to say, we'll hand the power back to the people, and we will run, government in that way where the sovereign people of Scotland are genuinely the sovereign authority in Scotland.
But Sarah, that's a quantum leap, isn't it? From parties changing their set structures to include people on the grassroots. And I've been up in the Highlands for a wee while, and I can tell you, over in the West Coast, up the Gairloch area, they would give their eye teeth for more local democracy, because no one seems to care about their stretch of land. And when I was telling them about what Norway does and how Finland has more democracy, they are absolutely pulling their hair out. And somebody came up to me and says, well, why can't we take that as a petition? I says, well, you can do it all you want, but what happens when a petition gets to the Scottish Parliament? Not very much, actually.
You need to have direct democracy in place. To then be able, because that's, if you look at Switzerland and you look at Norway, that's what happens once you have the people. Actually, it's the people who are sovereign in Scotland. It's the people who will tell Parliament yes or no, or sack them, whatever they need to do. Once that's in place, then it's easy enough to have a constitution in which, or you can have a referendum on the constitution in which local communities do get the kind of authority that they have in Switzerland and in other parts of the world, where they make the decisions that affect them. I'll tell you one other thing. The Swiss can have a vote on whether to pay their taxes or not.
I know. They have referendums all the time over there. But the point remains, Sarah, the Scottish people were talking about this, we are sovereign. But how many people actually think that or know that we're sovereign? And we're up against getting all those people on side, because it's a construct, a mental construct that people have been, I kind of haven't been able to grasp because of colonialism. How do we get them to start thinking that they're sovereign and knowing that they're sovereign?
I think, funnily enough, I had a meeting almost precisely about this yesterday. It's, what does it mean? Instead of, right now, when you say the people are sovereign, I'll tell you, there's all kinds of people. And that was, I said that we've got 3 obstacles. One of the 3 is a mindset, that is a colonized mindset, that our political establishment and our kind of leading lights all have. And you use the word sovereignty, and they immediately start talking about tartan warriors and Braveheart and all the rest of it. The notion that this is a constitutional thing just goes right past them, and you tell them the Swiss representatives refer to the people as the sovereign, and they just kind of blanket. It doesn't fit with how they see these constitutional realities that are Scots, absolutely distinctly Scottish, and very modern in application. They cannot see that. How do we get it across to ordinary people? So I'd forget about them. They'll come along when the people are moving again. I think for ordinary people, for ordinary Scots, it's, what does it mean? Sovereignty comes from the Crown of Scotland, and the Crown of the sovereignty is political. It means you have a say. In fact, you have the final say, and it's territorial. The Crown of Scotland owns the lot. Now, what does that mean? It means actually all of Scotland's territorial and maritime assets are already nationalised. Take the English Crown out of the equation, and they're nationalised. They belong to the people. That means, you know, that picture, that those elderly people who will die this winter because they can't heat their homes. They own the damned energy. They own the energy that they can't get to use because it's been taken from them. They own it. They own the gas. They own the oil. They own the renewables. They own the land that it's being generated from. And the owners are entitled to benefit from what they own.
Correct.
That's what we need people to understand. But right now, it's being plundered. It's being pillaged, literally by a foreign power and its contracts with different corporations. So we need to look at, how do we take this back? Now, we do have a plan for that. It's going to be one hell of a fight, but we need to cooperating with the what do you call them? The thieves. We need to stop we need to stop talking about how we're going to work constructively with a bunch of thieves.
Well, that's what John Swinney was saying yesterday in the Scottish Parliament.
These people are stealing what belongs to the Scottish people. The Scottish Crown is still in place, and the Scottish people are the Scottish Crown. Now, you can call that Braveheart language, but I will tell you that is constitutional fact. And right now, the oil and gas since the 1930s has been vested in a foreign crown. That's the basis of oil and gas negotiation and contracts, vested in His Majesty, a foreign king with a foreign crown, taking what actually belongs to the Crown of Scotland, which is the people. That's why the history matters. That's why constitutional fact matters. These people who can't afford to heat and eat, the people relying on food banks, they're the sovereign of Scotland. They're the people that own it all. And they're impoverished by a flipping, colonizing thief. And our SNP, our modern politicians, are busy trying to find some route through calling it legal and cooperative and this, that, and the other. And it's none of it. You can't cooperate with a dyed-in-the-wool psychopath. That's
right. So it brings back to the question: how do we get a political party changed? Then one of the messages I got from one of the listeners said we need to use Salvo and Liberation.Scot, and the SNP will have to follow. Is that a pipe dream, or can that happen? Do you think we can make such a stushy out of this and get enthusiasm ringing through the glens of Scotland, and that the SNP will have no choice but to follow the people?
I think where the power is vested in Scotland, and actually where it is always vested, is in the people. And tyranny lasts for just so long. The rich, the powerful, the privileged, the psychopathic, the ones that are desperate and don't seem to know when enough is enough, eventually overreach, and then the people come back. And we talk about liberation as a peaceful revolution, and that is absolutely what has to be on the way. It's a revolution, but hopefully, it must be a peaceful one. I think Liberation and Salvo and the ISP are not so much, coming into to lead or to be, to be the ones that I think we're expressions. We're symptoms of something coming into fruition, coming into being, the beginning of that, as Alf would say, it's there in post-colonial theory. It's the beginning of a liberation movement.
It happens. It's bound to happen, isn't it?
Yeah. And the point about that is that it reflects what is happening, the shift in that kind of paradigm and that kind of thinking in a population. It isn't just somebody's bright idea, much as I'd love to say, oh yeah, all my bright idea. That's not how it happens.
No.
It's much more organic than that. So my feeling is it's kind of the other way around, that there has to be a liberation movement in any, for any country that has been put in the position Scotland has, which is, whether people like it or not, that of a colony. Mm-hmm. There has to be a revolutionary movement when corruption and tyranny and oppression becomes intolerable. Mm-hmm. Those two things are coming together. Maybe something, I see the next 2 years as absolutely crucial. But I think it's very interesting, the language that Salvo's been using, the language that Civil Liberation is using, and we're not small, or this is not a small organization. We've over 11,000 Liberation members. We've 7,500 active campaigners. That's the Salvo. That's bigger than a good few political parties. Mm-hmm. We've also now a political party that's absolutely down the line on direct democracy, radical economic policy. Recognizing that's a foreign monarch. We don't take an oath to a foreign monarch.
Yeah.
With the ISP, these are very different ways of thinking, and they've not been around that long. So to see the language changing, and see people beginning to understand, what does it mean that the people are sovereign? What is the claim of right? It is actually a kind of mini codified constitution. It's extraordinary. It gives people these absolutely fundamental rights. What about colonialism? How is it that we're a colony? Now we're looking and going, okay, we need to get Scotland's real status recognised internationally. Then it comes back. Then it comes back to the people here. So it's not that, it's not Salvo or Liberation that is going to go and free Scotland at all. All we're going to do is knock down this massive impediment for the right for the self-determination of the people. It's about giving the power back to the people. Then the power has to come from the people. And that's the point at which we are going to need the faith, the hope, the belief, but this time not based on a fairy tale about
Correct. That's right.
Riding to based on we've got a tough fight in our hands, and we're damn well going to win that fight because we know exactly what we're up against. We know exactly what the steps have to be, and we know what the lies are, and we're going to knock those out of the way. And the promise that people can hold on to is on the other side of this. You will be in charge. You will no longer rely on the snake oil salesman and used car salesman that prance around and say, and watch it. If you want to see how bad it's going to get if we don't stop this, take a look at the Americans following their it's like they've all drunk Kool-Aid and they're all blindly following the leader. We need to change that in Scotland. We need to take responsibility. It's a hard task. It means we're all responsible, but we're all in it together. And we stop that pop idol nonsense.
Well, just to clarify, Mary Morrison got in touch and she says she's sick fed of political parties and she's pinning all her hopes on Salvo. So is Ricky Cochrane and so is Moira Mastev. All are wanting to know what is happening with Salvo in the next coming weeks and months. I think people are desperate for something to happen, Sarah, and I know that there's going to be a lot of pressure put on you and the Salvo team, but people are now actively seeking you out. That's a good sign as well, isn't it?
It really is. And one of the things what's happening next is that the Constitution, the Liberation Constitution, has to be ratified by the membership. And that is in process now. Believe it or not, we were hoping this would be done weeks ago, but actually, things take as long as they take. So we get that done. We've got the we've got the various documents that we need to notify, give formal notice that a liberation movement has been established, and then we're looking at dialogue. We're already looking at which groups and which meetings we should now be at. This is but I will tell you, if it because it might cheer people up, that we had a meeting, a few of us, including the late great Ian Lawson, this summer, with representatives from I think it's Baltic states, a Baltic, one of the it's a Bacha it's called, and we ran. They were very interested in what Salvo was doing and in liberation, and quite impressed by the membership. But when we began to talk about Scotland's real status, not a voluntary partner, but a dependency of the English Crown and what's been done, it was really hard for them to take that on. It was because the story is so ingrained.
Yes.
But we through it, and and I showed them, and here's what happened. Here's what people were told. This one kingdom, but no, here's what actually happened, and here's what's happening now. Here are the laws. Here's the statutes they've passed to do that, and make it in the English Crown. And here's what they did to Scotland. And the shock. It was disbelief, and then by the end of the meeting, the lovely law professor Elisabetta said, I think I agree. I think Scotland is a nation worth saving. That's a wonderful institution. And then she said, what can we do to help? We've got friends at the ICC. We've got friends at the ICJ. So that's what you do. Believe it or not, people think go up before a judge and get a ruling. Actually, it's tell people who are willing to. The British establishment kind of knows and is terrified to hear it, but internationally there are a lot of people who can see the truth when it's put in front of them, and then they'll want to help, and that's going to be, and that's already started. And as that spreads, and as we get that established internationally, and then hopefully can persuade the decolonization committee, the C24 committee, to list Scotland, to list us decolonization. In the process of that, the fact is, once people know, they don't unknow. You know how
that's right.
So many of our members have said. One of our Liberation Committee members, Diane Alexander, who is an SNP councillor, said, when she came across this, she kind of looked at it, and then she said suddenly she saw it, and it was like those pictures that are made of dots, and then suddenly a 3D image jumps out here, and she said, you can't not see it. That's the same internationally. Once people see the truth, they can't not see it.
Indeed.
That's what gets us that clarity. That but remember, Norrie, that's once that's out of the way, once we've done that, and we do get help once that happens, then it comes back. It won't be us. It won't be Liberation or Salvo. It will be the people of Scotland.
Yes, it will be. So in terms of going to the United Nations, we know from their articles, they say all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. That's their Article 1 on the decolonisation. There's several articles going down there. And if you put the word Scotland into some of those things, you could actually see where there's a deficit. And that can only be apparent when you read and you accept the definitions coming towards you. You're right, Sarah. They cannot unknow what they're going to be told. And if they make comparisons with other countries, they'll see that Scotland slots in very well with other countries that have sought to get their independence from England, by the way, and done their own thing. And have gone on to prosper as well after getting their independence. I don't think they call it independence in a lot of, I think it's freedoms or something like that. They use different language. Liberation.
Sometimes they call it independence, decolonisation.
Decolonisation, that's another one.
Yeah.
What my point is, there are a lot of people out there thinking, "Oh, what's the point going to the United Nations? The international laws are all corrupt. Look what's happening with the ICJ. Look at America, for goodness sake. How can we trust these people?"
Well, the thing is, the ICJ required other states under international law to do certain things and not to do other things, and they've just ignored it. The thing about what we're doing is we don't actually require anyone to do anything except recognise Scotland's status. And once Scotland is recognised for what it is, not a voluntary partner, but a dependency of the English crown, subject to a foreign sovereignty is the term, and plundered, and with all these colonial markers, then what happens is the right of a state to its own integrity and to protect itself and its borders. Bear in mind, there is no one United Kingdom. There are the two kingdoms, and the boundaries are still there. And if you don't believe me, look at what happened when the maritime boundaries were extended in 1964 by the UN through the, applying the kind of continental shelf model. England's boundaries became this. Scotland's maritime boundaries became that. Why did that happen if there's a single territorial UK? It's because there isn't.
That's right. There isn't.
And that's also, if that had not been the case, Tony Blair would not have pushed England's maritime boundary, taking some of Scotland's.
I know.
On the eve of devolution, because there would just be one UK, territorial entity. There isn't. There's two. There's no one United Kingdom. And so the rights, the territorial right to integrity of the United Kingdom is incredibly tenuous anyway. But the minute Scotland, the Scottish people, are recognised as being in that position, not only do we not need, and this is just so that when we've done what we need to do, we get international recognition. That's all it is. It's so that we know that will happen, and that they won't be expecting us to negotiate with the colonizer. Once we have that recognition, it means that when we have a democratic event, we don't need to. Not only do we not need to ask Westminster, but Westminster's not allowed to interfere. It's not allowed to have anything to do with it. So it's not about the international community doing anything. It's about clearing the way so that we can.
You make it sound as if it's quite straightforward. We just need to see Scotland recognised for what it is. And for the UN, that will give it a lot of backing when they look at this and say, yes, Scotland is that. And then we get other countries to step in, like Ireland, for example, and say, well, Scotland is this international country. That might be all we need, isn't it?
Well, no. If we're going to go by, if we're going to go by international law, what happens then is that we have a whole lot of countries ready to recognise Scotland as soon as we have a democratic event. But that also means that we can have a referendum with under international standards, with international standards applied, and with international observers and help. We can use a plebiscite and get a majority of pro decolonization representatives. We have to have a civic convention because you cannot, no matter what anybody believes, you cannot declare independence or that we're out of this fetid union from Holyrood, because Holyrood is an arm of the state.
Yes, it's got the civil service working there as well.
Well, in law, an arm of the state can't secede from the state.
No.
So, and if you want to know what will happen if we ignore that, take a look at the Kosovo ruling, because everybody barreled into that, including the UK government, arguing that they shouldn't be allowed to secede because they were worried about the implications for Scotland, I presume.
Oh, indeed.
So what has to happen is, and the ICJ said, no, look here. Yes, these representatives that were elected declared independence, but they did it from a separate body, from a convention. That's why there has to be a civic convention. Unfortunate, and very fortunately for Scotland, we have a provision in our constitution that was not touched by the treaty, even if it had come into effect, which developed from the Guardians of the Realm. You remember, Wallace and that lot. That was there before. In the absence of a monarch, there were the Guardians of the Realm. That became produced something called the Greater Council, while the King's Council, the Royal Council, developed into what we think of as the Parliament.
Yeah.
The Greater Council then called itself the Convention of Estates. That body stepped in whenever the three estates, what we think of as Parliament, could not be called. It also had responsibility for kind of oversight of things that had to do with the public good. It didn't meet regularly. It met when needed, when it was called, and it has been there from the time of prior to the Edward I and the invasion of Edward I. It has existed since before that time, and because it didn't meet regularly, it's a constitutional provision, not a discretionary thing. It could be, the Church of Scotland could call it tomorrow if it wanted to.
Wow.
There's nothing to stop it, and it's a constitutionally accepted body, given the status of the Parliament in 1703 by law, not to be by statute, and not to be impugned or demeaned or attacked on pain of treason in 1703. It has that standing, and that is what we can have called, so that there is a body which steps in when the Scottish Parliament can't be called, which it can't, and act on behalf of the Scottish people, as it says in the Claimant's Right, as a free and fair representative of the nation. We've got that waiting.
So who would sit in this Council of Estates then? Who would be? We'd have to have a vote to get people into it, to get it.
Listen, there are certain people constitutionally that are meant to have hereditary seats there. I don't think in a modern world anybody would expect us to do that. But what we could do is say, okay, who is there, who has a constituency, has been democratically voted into office. So you might look at trade union officials. Church of Scotland would, because it's one of the bodies that can call the Convention of Estates, would have to be represented, like as Kenyon Right. That's how Kenyon Right. So
of course,
the Constitutional Convention, because that was the role of the Kirk. Then you have what they had, elections across the boroughs and across the shires, people standing who wanted to be in that convention. So you'd look for, that's your convention. That's what Scotland did before. Let's do it again. Wow,
it's all there for the taking, isn't it? If we just get our heads clear and realize what we have to do. What is the first steps then? If for all the people listening, Sarah, today, they'll be listening to every word you're saying, holding on to it, trying to get some kind of hope and some kind of positive mention of this. But what do people have to do? Do they have to sign up to liberation.scot? Do they have to go to a Salvo meeting? Do they have to get their register of interest with this? Or do they just have to share and put things out that Salvo are putting out? What do people have to do now?
Anything and everything that they feel pulled to do. If you're looking around somewhere and you're seeing, I don't know, you might be Flamingo Land. This is it might, they're going to bring in tourists and the money will go straight back out of Scotland and it will damage, or it might be the plans to look around. Where is your sovereignty and where is the common good under attack? What do you want to do about it? They're planning to put great whacking pylons right across the Highlands. Get involved, start fighting. We did a small thing. It can be a really small thing that can make all the difference in the world. Don't think one person can't make a difference. Exactly. 2022, beginning of 2022, I was one person and said, I think we've been going about this all the wrong way. Scotland is not a version of England, and never was. We're a very, very different country. We've got a constitution. Look at this. Look at what the claim of right.
I know.
And I said, would anybody, I was part of the SSRG, I still kind of am, but I said, if nobody minds, I want to start a campaign based on this. And various people came with me. By the July, we had the core. We had 200 members of Salvo. By the September, it was 2,000. Today, it's over 7.5. We've got the Free Ports campaign running. Liberation is up and running. We're about to go to the UN. We've got, we've got all these, and there's so much more to do. Look around. What is there to do? Take 2 principles and ask yourself, what's happening where I live? Where is the common good under attack? And by the way, every area of Scotland has got common good funds that are supposed to be, that belong to the people and not to the council who's supposed to administer it. And the council is in bed with these Free Ports or whatever corporations handing over what belongs to the people for the good of the people, while our people are hungry and cold. And scared and impoverished, and that, and Scotland's constitution, the whole point, we had laws to prevent famine and hunger and to stop profiteering. We're not thinking like Scots yet. We're not acting like Scots. That's what we need to do. And so, sign up for Liberation. That's just a name on a piece of, online, and it doesn't commit you to anything. Get involved with your local Salvo hub. We've all got to rub along together and get along together and get active. What we're hoping is that bit by bit, the hubs will realise, this is my wee bit. Here's what we need to do here, and take it on.
What about a Scottish Constitutional Convention, Sarah? That should be up and running straight away, shouldn't it? All the political parties should be coming in forward, and leaving their baggage at the door. This is a convention to get independence, nothing else. That's got to be set up.
I think it's got to be more than that. I think it's got to be a convention that recognises its place within Scottish constitutional law and tradition, and how that behaved in that same way. That is, we behave and we think, and our groups and committees and all the rest of it behave like we're part of an English feudal system. We behave in terms of, it's ego, and it's who's more important than who, and we've got to get back to that notion that the Scots gathered committees, parliaments, and all the rest, and we had 3 parliaments prior to the Union, that they're there on behalf of the people, and there are certain inalienable principles that we have to follow, and we have to bring back into operation. It's got to be not the leaders, and I keep saying, where's the leader? And it's not about the leaders. It's about thinking of leadership as service. It's about how do we represent the people fully, and give their needs and will a voice fully, and operate that way, and not follow me. I'm the great reincarnation of Robert the Bruce or whatever. It's service, and it's a Scottish way of thinking about the common good, about we're all part and we're all kind of one. So it's got more than it's be a whole lot more than one of these, your usual bureaucratic talking shops. It's got to be a hell of a lot more than that, and that will take some work, but we can do it. And we're going to need, and people are going to have to start kind of getting up. I mean, really think in terms of a peaceful revolution. What do revolutions do? What do people do? Maybe we need a general strike. It's got to be peaceful. It cannot be violent, and it cannot be hate driven, and it should not be anger driven. We're all angry, but I think we need to focus on what's the prize? What do we need to do here? The word independence is just a word. think of it clearly. What does that look like? What does that mean? Not this great, hazy sort of thing, and then the politicians will do this. But here in my community, what does that freedom mean? What does that liberation mean? What does me being sovereign and the people in this community being sovereign and the common good being at the heart of everything we do and people owning it? How is that going to change? What do we do now? How do we act now?
Indeed. There's so many bodies about just now. There's the local campaign for local democracy. There's the pilings here in Inverness that are going to be coming on to talk about their problems. And there's loads and loads of groups out there, Sarah, that if we can come together and say, well, look, where is the biggest problem to what we're doing here? It's Westminster. Why is it Westminster? Why are we thinking like this? And at that point, surely the penny would drop and we're all thinking from the same hymn sheet. We can only hope that that's the way it's going to go.
I think everybody's got their own ideas. And some of the ideas out there, I think what Salvo is standing on, which is that Scotland does have a constitution. Yes, it needs to be codified, and yes, it needs to be put into modern language, but it's all there. And that does give you an identity as a Scot, as someone who doesn't bow and scrape, who doesn't accept the idea of privilege and class, and who looks to the common good. And that is a really good, solid bit of ground to stand on,
I think so.
from which to move forward. Now that's that's a very brief kind of summary of it, but that's where we come from. And and that is the Scotland that the liberation movement is looking to liberate, to decolonize.
Yeah.
There's a place in there for every passionate, decent, bright idea and campaign. I think that as long as we can agree, those basic principles, then we can move. I would say we move forward on that basis, and not on the basis of the kind of rhetoric, hot air that we hear. It's got to be practical. It's got to produce practical benefits for people. I agree completely. When I say, I tear my hair out when people talk about just, empowering communities. It's because if we haven't established a hierarchy where people are actually the authority, and the politicians are answerable to them, then it will be just another of these hollow exercises in name only, where people have power in name only.
That's right.
It's got to be real, and that means it's got to be based on a real constitutional principle that we have in place, that the people are the sovereign authority. And there's plenty models around the world that we can use to create our. But we have to be serious about it. We have to be absolutely committed to trusting people and helping communities to do that on the basis that that's where the authority lies. We're not ruled over. Government is an extension. It's a devolution of the power of the people.
Sarah, we've come to the end of our time, but every time we have you on, I'll get loads of messages. We'll have to go through them later on, but at some point in the future, we'll get you back on to answer a few of the questions we've got on. Just we run out of time at this point. Most people are wanting to know what's the time scale for this. Can we get it done within 2 years?
I hope so. That's what we're going for. Norrie, there's no.
I know, it's just people asking me questions. It's not me, Sarah.
Right. I mean, of course, people want to know. I'd like to know. All I can tell you is, you might think something's going to take a month, and it might take 6. Or you might think it's going to take a month, and it'll take a week.
Aye.
But we've only been liberation formed a year ago, 2 years ago. The the liberation movement on the 1st of September, 2 years ago. That's a very, very short period of time to have a whole organization
up and running,
constituted, and ready to move, and with all the necessary research done. We have a whole research team on this, and it's massive, and we're always finding new stuff. Just this morning, I came across a thing put in on, and I've just got the title for a new article. It's called "Was Like Us, Alaska and Hawaii." Go and see what happened to them. And so we're, as we begin to understand the real shape of things, international law and Scotland's real position, we've now got to the point where we are ready to do this, and things can change on a dime. One meeting with the right person at the right time can change everything. The point is, we haven't had them all this time. Scotland has not been it's not been represented on the Unrepresented Peoples Organisation at the UN. Not been represented on ECOSOC, within the economic and social part of the human rights. The Organisation of Human Rights within the UN. It hasn't even had a representative in the Celtic League. It hasn't been going and making this case to the Council of Europe. That was done in the past by the Scotland UN Committee. That's a completely ad hoc voluntary organisation. There has been nothing to make Scotland's case and to show what's been happening to Scotland internationally, and the way that our rights have been completely trashed by the English. Not, call themselves Britain if they like. There's no union. There's no United Kingdom. This is Scotland annexed by England.
That's right.
And everything done to us. We meet every single marker for genocide, Norrie. Every single one. And nobody internationally knows that, because we've been represented by our own oppressor. We've been represented by the Anglo-British state internationally, and our own establishment, our own representatives have not even looked at putting an organisation together. How easy would it be to say, all right, why don't we get this wee organisation to and sponsor them to go and let's get delegates to this and to here and to here. Let's arrange meetings. Let's get this out. No, nothing. It's all been, let's persuade the vampire, state to be nice to us. And oh dear, we've lost Grangemouth. Oh dear. Oh yes. Okay. Oh dear, we've got the winter fuel allowance. Oh dear.
And so it continues and continues.
And so it continues and continues. And you do not, the more you appease, the worse it will get. If you're not prepared to come out fighting and with the gloves off, then you need to step aside and let somebody do it that will.
Well, Sarah, there's people listening this morning from Wisconsin, New Brunswick, Minnesota, New York as well, all saying if there's anything they can do, they will help. We know Scotland's cause. And a lot of these people there's big messages coming in. I can't read it all out. I'll try and get it to you.
Well, listen, if they'd like to email me, I'll put them in charge. I'll put them in touch with the guy that is coordinator for the Salvo diaspora group. Love to connect with them.
Good.
They can contact me directly at Sara with no H at salvo.scot. Simple as that. I'm trying to think if we've got secretary at salvo.scot, but drop me a line and I'll pass them on.
Right. So there you are, Sara at salvo.scot. If you're listening in from overseas and you're listening to what Sarah's got to say and you've been really shocked, maybe, or maybe just encouraged, get in touch with Salvo. They'll be happy to deal with and get you involved if you want to help Scotland from abroad. Every bit of help we can get matters, doesn't it, Sara?
Absolutely. And as I said, and I'll keep saying it, you absolutely never know what's going to be the game changer. You can have you can have a big presentation and nothing comes out of it. You can have one wee meeting with somebody who's placed a certain, got a certain position in a government, and everything changes. So you never know, and everybody has something to contribute. Every single person.
So Scotland, stop thinking you're English and get out of this feudal system and start standing on your own 2 feet, because you are sovereign. Sarah, we've come to the end of our time. Listen, thanks so much for coming on, Sarah. That was amazing. An hour and 15 minutes you've gone without me having seen very much.
I'm sorry, I'm so terrible.
No. That's sometimes how it goes, and sometimes how I like it. When I listen back, I think, well, why would I want to interrupt at that point? But listen, Sarah, that we'll have to call it a close there. Listen, have a great weekend, and we'll catch up very soon.
We will, Norrie, and give my love to Inverness.
Yeah, I will. It's such a good place. I'm blessed to be here. I really am.
Yeah.
All right, Sarah, all the best. Bye now.
You take care. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. Right, that's it.